What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Flex Podcast. I am your host, Chris Raybon, and I'm joined by not only one of the top rankers in the game in Sean Kerner, but also one of the top wide receiver evaluators in the game, Matt Harmon, football writer and analyst from Yahoo Sports, creator of Reception Perception. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Man, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. I was just working up the wide receiver position preview for Yahoo. That just like was the thing I was working on right before we started the show. And man, this position, you say it every year. There's such a good amount of depth. There's such a good amount of quality. I mean, you can get into like the wide receiver 40 range and still feel like I can see a scenario where this guy, gets 100 plus targets. You get into the 60s and there's some guys who could potentially still be breakout players, even if the odds are slimmer. And really overall, it's like this year, guys, remember when you used to say, oh, like wide receivers changing teams, like you got to be careful about that. It's like, shoot, if you employ that strategy this year, you're wiping off like half the damn draft board. So it feels like more than ever, it's a fun year to talk wide receivers. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, we're going to get into specifically the wide receiver 2 tier on today's episode. So should be a good one. And just want to shout out our contest winner for this week, Hurts to the Moon. Congratulations. You got a free year of Action Pro. Hit up podcast at actionnetwork.com to claim your free year of Action Pro. If you guys out there listening, enjoy the pod, be sure to leave us a rating and review. We'll choose our favorite 5-star each week and give you a free year of Action Pro. So be sure to get on that. Matt, I want to start off before we jump into each of these players, just to kind of have you explain to everyone listening who may not be familiar, what is reception perception and how has it aided you in your evaluation of wide receivers?
Yeah, of course. And I think it starts with something that we all know with wide receivers, especially when talking about for fantasy and wide receiver production. Wide receiver production is so inherently dependent on outside variables. Obviously we think about the relationship between the quarterback and the wide receiver, but so much goes into it more than that. Specifically now, like how guys can be schemed open by different play callers. Like if they're, put in these new positions, it might be better than these guys who, I think about a guy like Cooper Kupp, and it sounds like a hot take to say this because he just led the NFL and catches, yards, and touchdowns, the Triple Crown. But I think if he came in the league 10 years ago, some dumb coach might have looked at him and been like, oh, he's like a big wide receiver. Like, let's throw him out there as our X. And, this is not similar to what he does at all in this Sean McVay offense. So I think it's more important now than ever to try to isolate wide receiver play from those outside variables. And that's what reception perception does. I go in over an 8-game sample for NFL players and college prospects and chart every single route that they run during that game, how often they get open versus man, zone, press coverage, how often they run each route type. And then the alignment data too, how often are these guys lining up as that X receiver? How often are guys lining up as flankers being deployed off the line in motion, stuff like that. So really, again, to try to isolate wide receiver play as much as possible from those outside variables and really try to understand everything you possibly can about a receiver in isolation so that we can better understand them as players and therefore hopefully better project them going forward.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody out there listening to go check it out. I subscribe, and it's really kind of illuminating. I'm always surprised by, looking at the percentiles that, you have each guy getting open versus man, zone, and press. And, some of them are kind of surprising. And I'll start with Michael Pittman Jr. He's the wide receiver 13. So he's that top wide receiver in the wide receiver 2 tier. And I think for maybe more casual drafters, his average draft position may come as somewhat of a surprise. I mean, but Matt, you've kind of charted him and you saw good things. So why do we like him so much?
Yeah, I love Michael Pittman. It does seem aggressive even at wide receiver 13. I have him as a top 10 receiver, like fringe top 10 receiver in my rankings, although he's in the same tier as some of these other guys we're going to talk about. So it doesn't really make a big difference there. But I do think that really high ceiling is within his range of outcomes because he's so good. RP was really high on Michael Pittman going into last year. He cleared that 70% success rate versus man coverage barometer that I typically want to see from these outside perimeter receivers like Michael Pittman in his rookie season, but then, yeah, you mentioned it last year, just absolutely blew it out of the water. In his RP profile, I compared him to a guy that's sort of a cross between Keenan Allen and Allen Robinson type. I mean, I think the Allen Robinson comp makes sense just because big outside receiver, but people think of Michael Pittman as just a jump ball guy because he's played with freaking Carson Wentz last year. And that's kind of all Wentz does is rifle that thing downfield into contested situations. But when you look at Michael Pittman's success rate on like slants, on digs, on curl routes, those just short to intermediate patterns, super high, some of the best success rates on those routes that I charted last year. And that is very Keenan Allen-esque, just thumping defenders over and over again against zone coverage. And even as a man beater outside, I mean, 96 percentile last year, success rate versus press coverage. I think he carries all the traits, all the talent and ability of a true number one receiver. And this is a guy that just got in my opinion, a quarterback upgrade, obviously in Matt Ryan, and he should just dominate targets in this passing tree because there's a lot of guys behind him that are either question marks or unproven. So I just think everything looks like it's lining up for Michael Pittman. Like he already broke out last year, but I think he's set to take yet another step this season.
Yeah, this is a guy who, I mean, given the way he can get open, you have Matt Ryan, who you actually, I think unlike Carson Wentz, you might be kind of unafraid to give some more passing volume to. I mean, he has like an outside shot at leading the league in targets. I mean, he really doesn't have much competition. Sean, what are your thoughts on Pittman? Do you have him up there at 13 in line with ADP as well?
Yeah, actually, I have him a little bit higher. He's, between wide receiver 11 and 12. It's very close between those two guys. But yeah, he's definitely, potentially lead the league in targets because the volume of this passing attack could go up this year. They led the league last year in time of possession with the lead. And I expect that to regress a bit this year. So they could be playing, from behind or neutral game states a little bit more this year. And even Frank Reich just mentioned that, ground and pound teams don't win championships. So there you go. He probably trusts Matt Ryan a little bit more to throw it around. So all signs point to Pittman just having a massive, massive season. There's still a ton of uncertainty behind him. We don't really know who's going to be the number 2 or number 3 wide receiver. The tight end room is going to be a 2 to 3 way committee. So he should dominate targets. He's entering year 3 at 24 years old. That's when players are just entering their prime. So all signs point to a breakout season. He reminds me of T. Higgins, where he's definitely worth taking at ADP, but he just doesn't offer that much value at ADP. But either way, he's part of my draft plan for sure.
Yeah, I love me some Michael Pittman. He's just a good football player. I was a year early on him. Like I liked him as a rookie.
You're 2 years. Yeah.
I was like bragging about, like, I was like, he's even a great special teamer. Like I was like watching his special teams highlights at USC. Like dude is he can just ball. Yeah. So I was happy to see how well he was doing in RP. Wide receiver 14 is Jaylen Waddle. And Matt, this one is kind of tough for me because I love Jaylen Waddle. I always, I'm kind of aware of the year 2 leaps that these good wide receivers who play well in year 1 tend to take. But at the same time, I also know that a guy who can command, 25% targets per route in Tyreek Hill is kind of joining this team. So how do we kind of reconcile, the talent, the potential for the year 2 leap with, things like the low average depth of target and the potential dip in targets, and kind of get to where we should have Jaylen Waddle?
Yeah, I struggle with Jaylen Waddle too. I'm pretty much on the same page with you there in that I really like the player. He was actually number 1 in success rate versus man coverage among the prospects charted from that 2021 draft. Really liked him coming in. I think he didn't play at 100% all of last year, but still, like, from a route success rate standpoint, you did see the ability to win on deep patterns too, which I think there can be more than the low ADOT role for Jaylen Waddle. But he's still playing with the same quarterback. And I think ADOT is can largely be a quarterback stat at times. And I think that specifically with a player like Jaylen Waddle, like if he was playing with, Josh Allen or something, like I bet you he'd have a higher average depth of target than he did with Tua last year. But Tua remains a starter. And yeah, I think that I would have been totally willing to pay the wide receiver 14 price if, Tyreek Hill wasn't ever traded to this team. But God, it is really difficult to sort of reconcile that Tyreek Hill is a top 5 receiver in the league. He's going to like you said, command those targets because he is that good. And I think if you view Tyreek Hill as a top 10 receiver, which if I'm breaking ties in the favor of one of these two guys, it's going to be in the favor of Tyreek Hill, and you're still going to rank Jaylen Waddle as wide receiver 14, you pretty much have to believe from a projection standpoint that nobody else is really going to make much of a dent in this passing game. And I mean, look, that could be totally fair. We haven't seen one like nice thing about Mike Gesicki since this new coaching staff arrived there. Like they want him to play inline tight end, and he's not playing inline tight end.
It's gonna be Durham Smith. It's gonna be Durham Smith. Like all day.
Yeah, right.
Smythe,
I mean,
so his name is.
Smythe, right? Did we
Smythe
argue about
Smith.
that?
I don't know. It should be Smith, but
I mean, who cares? Either way, long story short, who cares about Durham Smith or Smythe? Like, I mean, that's what we're talking about. At this point, it's going to have to be these two guys like absolutely dominating targets because this team's probably going to be pretty run heavy too, right? Like if we believe in the coaching philosophy that Mike McDaniel's going to bring over from San Francisco, I just think there's a lot of questions about Jaylen Waddle, not the player, but just about the outlook this year. And he's a guy that I've got ranked lower than consensus, you know, bunch behind several of the guys we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, same here. I just, you know, it just doesn't, the math doesn't really add up. Sean, what about you? Where do you have Waddle ranked?
Yeah, this is you know, definitely a situation of I don't hate the player, I hate the ADP. So I have him ranked, you know, 6 slots lower than ADP. So I'm not getting him too much. And you know, last year was just the perfect storm of target share for him. Devontae Parker missed a ton of time. You know, the Dolphins brought in Will Fuller to sit on their IR all season. So he didn't really have much competition there for targets. And plus the O-line was a disaster. So they would just scheme up quick passes to Jaylen Waddle every game. So yeah, with Tyreek Hill there, that's going to command, you know, targets. And Cedric Wilson's kind of sneaky too. He should see a ton of playing time. So I think it's going to be way tougher for Waddle to hit, you know, like low end wide receiver 1 value, unless you think Tua is going to make a significant year 3 leap. I'm staying away from Waddle this year.
All right. Terry McLaurin is next. Another guy who, you know, the talent is there. Interestingly enough, you know, last season, he played all 17 games and he still finished as the wide receiver 25. He had 77 catches, 1,053 yards, 5 touchdowns. Matt, do you think Carson Wentz is enough of an upgrade over Taylor Heineke to justify McLaurin's ADP going into the season?
Yeah, you kind of got to say it through gritted teeth. But I think Carson Wentz is the best quarterback that Terry McLaurin's ever played with. Here's the thing about Terry McLaurin, just awesome player, right? And if you could sort of kind of, I think this is my favorite, or one of my favorite RP stats over the last few years. Terry McLaurin was 5th in the NFL in success rate versus man coverage among the guys they charted last year, but was 2nd in percentage of contested targets because he's playing with Taylor Heineke. And, you know, shout out to ODU's finest, but that guy cannot push the ball down the field. So there were a lot of routes where the ball's late getting there, and Terry's still a star, so he can go up and win those passes. But we also kind of forget too that, you know, obviously Taylor Heineke was not supposed to be the starter for this team last year. They lost Ryan Fitzpatrick like right away. And you just kind of forget about that. But they also were, you know, without Curtis Samuel for long stretches of the season, without Logan Thomas for long stretches of the season, Antonio Gibson's like playing on a busted shin back there. It was basically Terry McLaurin and the preseason boys for a long stretch of time last year. He was actually 3rd in percentage of routes doubled last year in reception perception was Terry McLaurin. So I think all things like that's a lot stacked against you if you're McLaurin last year. Even if it's, you know, you can dominate the target share, like it's a huge slice of the pie, but what kind of pie are we really talking about here with that offense last year? So I think Terry's a no doubt superstar talent. I think he could just go absolutely nuts in the right situation. I don't think this is the right situation though, obviously. So I've got him like kind of right around this area, like wide receiver 14, 15. I think he's good enough just if everything hit to be a top 10 fantasy receiver. It's just, this is still probably not that situation.
Yeah, it's odd because I feel like, you know, I want to be able to project him as high as, you know, wide receiver 15, but he comes in more in the back end, like wide receiver 19 in my model, just because I don't know. It's kind of, I kind of expect a similar season. Sean, what about you? What do you got for Terry?
Well, first, Matt, if you don't mind, I'm going to take Terry McLaurin and the Preseason Boys as my new band name. Thank you for that. But yeah, like,
I don't know if you're going to sell out a lot of shows, but good luck.
Yeah, probably not. But, you know, as Matt was saying, like, you grit your teeth about Wentz, but like, he probably is an upgrade at quarterback from like the carousel of like 8 to 9 quarterbacks we've seen with McLaurin over the years. Certainly downfield. Last year I always bring it up. McLaurin only saw 48% of his downfield targets were catchable. Wentz he's a decent downfield thrower. He had 76% of his downfield throws last year were catchable, which ranked 4th in the league. So I think they are going to connect on a few more deep balls this year. Either way, McLaurin, he ranked 2nd in percent share of his team's air yards last season. I don't see why that would go down this year. I mean, Jahan Dotson should be able to step up as a solid number 2, but McLaurin's still going to dominate in target share this year. So I do like him in the wide receiver 15 range. He does fall at times to 17 through 19. Like, that's how this wide receiver tier is. You get some of these guys that drop, close to the, wide receiver 20 range. So I like getting him when he falls. I think he's definitely one of those guys that has a high floor and ceiling combo that I like to target as my wide receiver 2, or even like my first wide receiver 3, take him pretty early. But yeah, I do like McLaurin this year.
Yeah, he feels very safe just because of the target share.
Mhm.
We've seen him kind of ball out with the bad quarterbacks, but I mean, this narrative that Carson Wentz is better than like anyone he's had is
Well,
like,
I mean,
it's kind of funny.
Alex Smith, Tyler
Let's look at the
Heineke.
numbers though. So last season, Taylor Heineke 6.9 yards per attempt. Last season, Carson Wentz 6.9 yards per attempt. Career Carson Wentz 6.8 yards per attempt. Career Taylor Heineke 6.8 yards per attempt. Like, it's like it just doesn't. It's gonna be the same thing at the end of the day. He might just get his yards different because like Carson Wentz could throw deep better, but he's gonna like whiff on like the easy throws to Terry and make him like, so it's
Kyle Allen, Garrett Gilbert. I'm trying to remember like other quarterbacks he's had. It's been bad.
There's some
Carson Wentz has been bad.
real goofballs. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, Carson Wentz is definitely below average. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, but no, I've actually taken a lot of Terry. I don't mind him there. I think even if I have him ranked maybe a couple of spots back from where he's going, he just feels so safe, especially compared. You have guys like Mike Williams is in this tier. He's more of the wide receiver 2 on his team, and there's Waddle goes in this range. I think that's too high, so I don't mind Terry. Diontae Johnson's the wide receiver 16. Matt, was Big Ben holding Diontae back these last 2 years? I mean, Big Ben only averaged 6.6 and then 6.2 yards per attempt, but because he averaged so few yards per attempt, he was throwing a lot of balls, and Pittsburgh was near the top of the league in attempts the last couple of years. I don't know if I see that with the quarterbacks they have now, but he absolutely murdered reception perception, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's a really good player. Although I think to answer the questions, like, was Big Ben holding him back? Yes. And will Pittsburgh take a step back in pass attempts? Also, yes, probably. Yeah. So I think the answer is yes to both. But I do think Diontae Johnson is a bit of a misunderstood player because of his like average depth of target or yards per target and stuff like that. And I think that is all Big Ben related. Like, the guy he's probably the most limiting quarterback in the entire NFL. And it's not that he was awful as an individual player for sure, but it's also because like there's so much that Ben can't or won't do at this point in his career. Like, he won't go under center. He won't run a lot of play action. Like, he will not turn his back to the defense. He will not get hit. If Ben Roethlisberger had to pump fake once last year, like, he was getting sacked every single time, period. Pittsburgh's offense rough to watch the last 2 seasons, but I think when you do isolate Diontae Johnson through reception perception, you see a really good player. He was first in success rate versus zone in 2020, and last year he was second only because Cooper Kupp went absolutely nuclear. But still, he's like a 91st percentile player against man coverage as well. He's legitimately gets open at all 3 levels of the field. And I think that's the thing about Diontae that kind of goes undersold. I think that Pickens has a chance. George Pickens, who I liked a lot coming in the NFL. And I mean, he's just, going nuts in training camp and preseason. I think there's a chance that he's the second starter and 2 wide receiver sets ahead of Chase Claypool. I think almost like it seems like a given at this point because Pickens. I mean, also, by the way, guys, isn't terrible that like they had Chase Claypool read George Pickens' name on draft night? Like that guy is going to end up replacing him. But anyways, yeah. So I think Diontae, really good player. It's just a weird offense to invest in right now. So I've kind of had him as like not a green light player, not a yellow or not a red light player, but somewhat like a yellow light player. Like, I'm okay with taking him at his ADP because I feel really good about him, but just as an individual player. But man, I mean, it's like we're talking about Mitch Trubisky, maybe rookie Kenny Pickett at some point this year. It's a weird quarterback situation to get involved in.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of the worry. It's hard to nail down, especially because we don't even really know the breakdown of, who's going to start for Pittsburgh, all 17 games. It could be a kind of a
Yeah.
mix of these guys. Pickett did play well, so hopefully he just kind of wins that job sooner than
Yeah,
later.
that's what we want.
Sean, where are you on Diontae?
Yeah, he sort of reminds me of Waddle, where I definitely love the player, but just the ADP, it's hard to get there with him. I'm projecting him, wide receiver 21 right now, just because, like you mentioned, Raybon, I think that the efficiency of this offense can't get any worse without Big Ben, but certainly the pass volume will go down. They ranked 4th last season in pass attempts, so I think they're going to be more balanced this year, which will hurt Deontay's targets. And he benefited last year from JuJu Smith-Schuster missing most of the season. So I think having 2 viable wide receivers and Chase Claypool and now George Pickens there will eat into that. And then we got to remember Pratt Freiermuth is going to be, even better in year 2. So there's just a lot of mouths to feed in this offense that probably won't be averaging more than 240 yards a game. So it's just hard for me to get there with Diontae Johnson, but I do, love him as a player. It's just this season I'm downgrading just a little bit.
Yeah, for me, I actually have him in this range. What does it for me is, I factor in targets per route run a lot. I obviously, targets is kind of it's somewhat of a usage stat, but somewhat of a skill stat. You still do have to get open. He's averaged 27% the last 2 years. So
yeah,
that's pretty impressive given, a lot, like not all of that was without, JuJu and without other guys. Claypool was playing well that year in 2020, and Diontae was still kind of at that same pace. I think that will obviously go down if the average depth of target goes up. But, either way, I mean, that kind of just matches up to Matt, what you found in reception perception. The guy is just always open, 27%. That's elite in terms of targets per route run.
You got to think about too with the JuJu part of it. And I actually like JuJu this year. But this is like JuJu was coming kind of into his peak when Diontae got drafted by the team. And then one guy just rocketed past the other on the depth chart. And I think a lot of that is just player quality with Diontae Johnson there too. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird offense. And I agree, Sean, if you look at this team, I'm weirdly obsessed with the Steelers, and I'm not like a Steelers fan. I'm not from the area. I have no attachment to the team whatsoever, but maybe it's because I like Diontae Johnson a lot as a player, but if you squint at this offense, it's yeah, there's a lot of good players here that could potentially command targets. And then we're talking about them commanding targets from, like Mitch Trubisky for the first 4 games, and then maybe Kenny Pickett. I don't know. It's a very, very strange offense that I think could have really good fantasy values in it, but just hard to project.
All right, let's jump to wide receiver 17, DK Metcalf. Matt, are we betting on talent here, or is this ADP too high given his loss of Russell Wilson?
It's too high. I mean, it is a bet on talent if you're going to have him at wide receiver 17. I didn't look at the ADP source too closely, or at least I didn't see where Tyler Lockett was. But I guarantee, I think Tyler Lockett's
39. I think, yeah.
I
love Tyler Lockett. Yeah, that's the guy I'm targeting in this offense.
I can't help myself, Chris, but I draft Tyler Lockett in the 9th round every freaking time he falls there. Because I still think that there's not that big of a gap between these two guys. Having Lockett at 39 and DK at 17. For me personally, I've got Lockett maybe closer to 36 and DK closer to 20 or 21. So I mean, for me, I've got DK a little lower than consensus and Lockett a little higher because I don't think the gap is going to be that wide. If Lockett has to lose that much because of losing Russell Wilson, I think DK, even if he's closer to kind of the prime of his career, but Lockett was great last year too. I mean, both these guys are really good players. I don't know. Either way, I don't want to be too aggressive on these. As much as I love this duo of wide receivers, I think they're one of the 3 best duos in the NFL still. Geno Smith and Drew Lock, that's an unserious quarterback situation. That's not real.
It's not. I can't believe that they have some kind of handshake deal with Geno or something where they're just gonna give him every opportunity to be the starter. It's kind of absurd. This is the Geno Smith that got punched in the face on the New York Jets. This is the same Geno Smith. He's still in the league. In the starter conversation. It's crazy.
Can you remember a situation where, I mean, it's not as if Geno's even young or promising. He was drafted in 2013, he's washed. This is what his Seahawks is his 4th team because he was wasn't he on? He was on the Giants, and he was on like another team there for a hot sec, or I don't even know.
He's,
Maybe
he's on both New York teams. I know that.
Yeah.
So like
the Chargers, he was on the Chargers for a year.
Yeah, he was. That's right. I couldn't remember if it was the Raiders or the Chargers. It was one AFC. Well, I never thought Raiders because he like started for the Giants in that infamous Ben McAdoo benching Eli Manning, and then he getting fired for that.
I forgot about that.
Clearly see. The point is, Gino's been in our lives a long time. I can't remember like a not young, not a guy that's like flashed recently, getting just like the runway to start with an NFL team. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, maybe Drew Lock takes over, but Drew Lock hasn't been great either. No. So it's tough. Sean, where are you on DK? Are you at wide receiver 17 or are you below?
No, I have him right here, which is unfortunate. He's very hard to project this year because of all the things you guys mentioned. I mean, he's still an elite talent. He could still provide, low end wide receiver 1 production, even without Russell Wilson. He did it last year when Geno Smith started week 6 through 8. He was the wide receiver 8. And Drew Lock, he's terrible, but he's a bit of a gunslinger. I mean, if he's throwing interceptions and they get behind, he's still going to be slinging it. So that helps Metcalf. So it's a weird situation. And, Metcalf, he was very volatile last season, even with Russell Wilson. He finished outside of the top 24 65% of the time last year, which ranked 28th out of 100 wide receivers that played at least 10 games. So it just goes to show that he does have a pretty low floor despite being elite talent. So he's a player. I'm not really targeting him in this range. I much rather have like a Brandin Cooks type of guy that you can rely on week in, week out. So I have Metcalf ranked here. I'm just not drafting him here.
Yeah, it's weird because you kind of feel like, okay, Metcalf's one of these, number 1 wide receivers that's kind of locked into this, target share, and that's what kind of makes him safe. But I mean, Tyler Lockett's no slouch. Metcalf did out target him, on a per route basis, by about 5%, which is pretty good. But Lockett's still there, getting like over 20%. So I have him in the mid 20s. I can't really upgrade him when there's just there's so many questions at quarterback. I mean, this is Geno Smith we're talking about here. DJ Moore, this one seems a little low for me. But Matt, I'll ask you, like, are the 1,100 yards and 4 TDs, like each of the last 3 seasons, it's pretty much what he does. 1,100 yards, 4 touchdowns. Is that closer to his true like median? Is that his floor? Is that his ceiling? Like, will he ever break through in the touchdown department? Talk to me.
I mean, you'd imagine at some point he's got to have a season where he gets like 7 and 8 or something like that. Like just 4 year in and year out is pretty crazy. I think DJ Moore's a really good player. And like talk about a guy that's just gone through the ringer in terms of quarterback play. Like the moment he gets there and starts kind of establishing himself, Cam Newton's shoulder falls off. And then he's had, he's had the Taylor Heineke experience, I think, for a couple of seconds there. And then the Kyle Allen year, he's had, Sam Darnold. It's just been a murderer's row of bad quarterbacks. And I think Baker Mayfield is pretty, like, I think it's probably average. I think he's an average quarterback, but average is an awful lot better for DJ Moore than what he's been dealing with. I have him ranked quite a few spots ahead of wide receiver 18 because I do think he's a really good player. I think also like his target share in this offense and the pace of this offense is a little underrated for the last 3 seasons. And, you just look at DJ Moore, like he's one of these guys that I kind of want to bet on having a ceiling season at some point. And, if Baker can give them 2020 Baker levels of play, I think there's a chance that DJ Moore sees a huge target share and like just a huge raw target number like he did last year, and then turns in a really nice season. The one thing I will complain about, because I always will happily complain about the Panthers, I think they're kind of like a little backwards in the way they use DJ Moore. Like I talked about these offensive coordinators and play callers using these number 1 wide receivers in creative ways. I kind of hate how they just roll him out as the X receiver. I think DJ Moore would actually be great in like a Deebo Samuel. I know the Deebo Samuel role gets kind of like thrown around all the time now, but not like as a pure rusher, but in the way they get him like design touches and like having him run over the middle of routes over and over and over again. I feel like that would actually be better for DJ Moore as a detached line of scrimmage player. But I mean, listen, the Panthers haven't done a lot of smart things in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it is kind of surprising that they just line up with, as the X, because he's not really like, killing. I mean, he's I think what is he better? He's better than average against man coverage, and he's average against press, right? So
yeah,
it's
he
not
was
like,
better in 2020 than he was last year from like a separation standpoint, but he's taken a lot of progress from where he was earlier in his career, where I almost thought like, man, he might have to be a gadget player because he was so raw as a route runner his first couple of years. But so he's made a lot of improvements. But yeah, I agree. I think he's certainly a player that would benefit from being moved around the formation more, but they just have never really done that with him.
John, where are you on DJ Moore?
Well, he's essentially the NFC South Keenan Allen. Just pencil him in for 90 catches for 1,200 yards and 4 to 6 touchdowns and move on with life. That's pretty much what he is right now. And I think that, I think I've taken the over 4.5 touchdowns, receiving touchdowns for him the past 2 seasons. I promise I will stop this year. So he's absolutely crushing it this year. But
so this
is the year. I think he's not going to be a 10 touchdown, like double-digit touchdown guy, of course, but certainly, 5 to 7 touchdowns is in his range of outcomes. He led the team with 10 end zone targets last year. All 4 of his touchdowns were end zone targets. So you'd think a player with his, after the catch ability, he'd be able to sneak in 1 or 2 outside of the end zone. So I think that, 6 to 7 touchdowns is a fair projection for him. So we've yet to see his ceiling. I don't know if it's, elite wide receiver 1, but I do think getting him sort of in this mid-range wide receiver 2, low wide receiver 2 is decent because he's going to provide you high floor, and that's kind of what you need in season-long head-to-head formats anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I have him wide receiver 14, so
Nice.
I'm a few spots higher as well on DJ. I'm just waiting for him to do something different besides the 1,100 yards and the 4 touchdowns. But I mean, he's just so locked into his target share too. I mean, especially after Robbie Anderson took that big step back, and they still, I mean, they have Tommy Tremble. That's nobody at tight end. Harris Marshall was probably the worst wide receiver in the history of football last year. Like there's not much there to challenge him. Mike Williams, this one is another tough one because I feel like he was the wide receiver 12 the wide receiver 12 in points per game last year in half PPR, but it was just really like a tale of either it's like the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Matt, do you think there'll be enough consistency for redraft taking him at wide receiver 19?
Probably not. I think he's a volatile producer because he's kind of a volatile player. It feels like we almost got a little greedy with Keenan Allen, or it's not Keenan Allen, with Mike Williams last year, where I'd been saying for a couple of years, like the Chargers, I think the more you think about that Anthony Lynn coaching staff, it was really bad just from like player usage. They had just Mike Williams kind of they really pigeonholed Austin Eckler as, we're not going to use you around the goal line. Like, we're not going to like draw you up creative ways because you're too small. And that was like, they're always trying to get these bad banger backs in there to take away carries in that way. And it's sort of similar with Mike Williams. They were always using him as just a pure like vertical receiver. I remember the Phillip Rivers years of him just throwing up like little lollipops down the field, like, because he couldn't push the ball deep anymore to Mike Williams. And I was like, Mike Williams can do a little more than that. He can be a guy that you throw the ball on, into space because he's big, and, he can separate on some over the middle routes, and he's such a long strider, so he can get open in some ways like that. But then we sort of got that the first 4 weeks of the season, and it seems as if people want to all right, now maybe he can overtake Keenan Allen. And I don't know about that. I mean, I just think that Mike Williams is probably not a true number 1 receiver. I think he's sort of a boom bust wide receiver too, that can do a lot more than he was just doing in his early career when he was exclusively a vertical receiver. But he's probably not the type of separator that you want handling a huge target share, because then your passing offense is just going to be very volatile. But Chargers are a weird team, man. Like, they don't have a lot of team speed. It's like Keenan Allen, it's Mike Williams, and then Josh Palmer, who is kind of like fits into the same archetype of receiver as these two guys, slower, but maybe can win in contested situations. I don't know. I'm doing the ultimate hedge thing though in my rankings, where I have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in like back-to-back spots, but I don't know if that's like, I still don't know if I really like that though.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't sleep on Keenan. Keenan Allen's like might be the best route runner in the game. I mean, Keenan Allen just dog walks people. Mike Williams is like kind of the opposite, like you said. He's a different player. I mean, the thing, like, Keenan Allen just always going to give you like 5 catches for like 60 yards, like whether he gets the touchdown. it is what it is. But like Williams is like, 2 catches for 5 yards or 4 for 150. It's a little different. But Sean, what about you? I mean, you were like the Mike Williams champion. And now you,
For the
you
first
probably
5
jinxed
weeks.
him. Yeah, you did your victory lap, and then but you still finished as the wide receiver 12. So I would still say you were right about that.
Yeah. So I mean, he was the wide receiver I had the most exposure to last season. And he was going in the wide receiver 40 to 45 range.
Yeah.
It was way more fun getting a guy like him there. So getting him a wide receiver 19, I'm shying away a little bit. As Matt mentioned, he's a volatile player, so it just comes with the territory. But I think, considering I had Williams on like all of my teams, I do remember he suffered a knee injury in week 5. And then he was very limited the next week. And then they had the bye week where he was healthy enough to play. I think that really did hurt the momentum he had. So he might have been dealing with that knee injury all season. We don't really know, but that seemed to be the trigger point when he really fell off the cliff. But we have to remember, he's going to be Justin Herbert's #1 downfield target and #1 end zone target. So there's a lot of value in that, but it does come with a lot of volatility. So that's why, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but he does carry a high ceiling and a low floor. You just have to know that when you draft him. Again, it was a lot more fun getting him in the wide receiver 40 range where he's, on your bench to start the season. Whereas this year, he's got to be a mid to low range wide receiver 2. I think that's where he should have been ranked last year, but just know he's going to be very volatile week to week.
Yeah, he's obviously preferable in best ball. You could still do it with him in season long, but for a guy you're drafting this high, I think I'd like a little bit more consistency. The ceiling is still there though, but would like a little more consistency. Brandin Cooks, wide receiver 20. I mean, he's had 6,000-yard seasons in the last 7, and he had like this one really bad one mixed in on the Rams of all teams with Sean McVay. So it's kind of tough to get. He comes up really well in my model because there's just no one else in Houston to catch the football at this point. So Matt, what do you kind of make of his, true floor and ceiling? Being that he's probably going to be a target high, but in this really bad passing offense.
Yeah, he's super easy to project. I feel like he's going to come in right at around this range. And he's a boring pick, but like feels pretty good just because he's a good player. He's going to have a good target share. And I think Davis Mills showed enough last year to be like, okay, I'm all right. Fine. I'm fine attaching myself to his pass catchers. I would say though, like I really like Nico Collins as a potential like sleeper, and you get him so late in drafts that like I would tell her just take Nico Collins at the end of your draft in every single draft, just because I think he's got a chance to walk into like 100 targets. And he looks like, from a player comparison standpoint, his rookie year reception perception actually looks a lot like T. Higgins and like AJ Brown's rookie year. There's a couple other goofball comparisons mixed in there, but those are two ones that I like, especially the T. Higgins one really makes a lot of sense to me. So I don't know. I don't want to turn this into the Nico Collins section, but
no, I love it. I think did we end up making a bet on Nico Collins?
Wasn't it James Prochet? Or
I know we have
related to the James Prochet?
No, I think
James Prochet.
I
love me some James.
I have
Prochet.
under 49.5 receptions. But yeah, I thought we had like a side deal on Nico Collins. I don't think we did. But yeah, I love the Nico Collins discussion though.
What about Brandin Cooks?
What about Brandin Cooks? Yeah, I think Cooks I underestimated just his career, him as a talent, because I assume part of his success was, due to playing with Drew Brees, Tom Brady, good Jared Goff, Deshaun Watson. But last year he really impressed me what he did with Davis Mills. So like I said, I rather have a guy like Brandin Cooks than a DK Metcalf or Mike Williams, where, they're going to have a lower floor week to week. Brandin Cooks is as solid as it gets. I love getting him here. And last year, Ray, remember I mentioned like Davis Mills locks into his first read. He led college football in targeting his first read in Stanford. So, I think that suits well for Cooks. He's obviously the focal point of the passing offense. So he's a very high floor player, and I love getting him here.
Yeah, he pops in my model. I have no issues. I actually have him at wide receiver 20, but it's just such a safe play. I mean, there's, even if Nico, takes a big step forward, it's just wide open in this offense. It's not like the tight ends aren't really that great. The running backs are just,
John Mechie's missing. The rookie receiver's going to miss the whole year with leukemia. Like, I know but the drop off from Nico and Brandin Cooks is like we're talking about like Chris Conley, Chester Rogers. I mean, total journeyman.
Yeah. I don't even know how to project like the rotation at this point. Like it's like who's
Who
gonna even
cares?
make the team,
Don't.
right? Yeah, exactly.
Enjoy the rest of
exactly.
your summer, Raybon. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Don't worry about that. Go to a few happy hours.
Hey, we'll scout him at the game. We're going to the game this week.
Oh
Let's scout him
that's
out.
right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they got to play them all because they all suck.
Yeah, see some Philip Dorsett action. Let's go.
Oh God, I forgot he's on this roster.
Yeah, I mean,
come
he might run like play like over half.
He
the
might
snaps
be
at
the
this
3.
point. Yeah,
Oh,
he
God.
might be the 3.
him, Chris Conway is there. It's weird. Marquise Brown is the wide receiver 21. Matt, he's gonna have 6 games without DeAndre Hopkins, and then Hopkins gets back. You also have Ertz there. Rondale Moore probably gets a little bit bigger of a role somehow, some way. Still got AJ Green there. I mean, it seems like a crowded, kind of pass offense for Marquise Brown. Do you think wide receiver 21 is that enough? Those 6 games without him, will he be consistent once Hopkins comes back? Like, what do you think of Marquise here?
Well, it would be hard for Rondale Moore not to have a larger role than what he did last year, but we'll see. I really don't trust Cliff Kingsbury with player usage or player deployment because it's just been so strange since he's been there. It's so static too. I really like the idea of Marquise Brown as their potential like vertical slot receiver replacing Christian Kirk. I know that that's like the rhetoric out of Cardinals camp right now is that Rondale Moore could play that position, but I mean, like I said, with Rondale Moore, he basically played like fake wide receiver last year. Like what, I don't even know what the guy was out there running like those shallow routes against a bunch of zone coverage. So I do kind of like Marquise Brown in this range. I think he's an underrated player. He's been a pretty good zone beater in reception perception the last 3 years. And he's going to face a lot of zone coverage with another mobile quarterback, just like he did in Baltimore as well. And I think he can be a better fit as a vertical player with Kyler Murray than he was with Lamar Jackson. So I'm kind of fine with Marquise Brown here. I really am curious again, because I don't trust Cliff Kingsbury with player deployment. Like last year when DeAndre Hopkins missed time, they basically just threw that Wesley guy out there and didn't change their in Hopkins' position. It didn't change the offense at all. And so I wonder if they're going to do the same thing this year in the first 6 games. And, does that mean that Marquise Brown stays as a slot receiver in 4 wide receiver sets? I think that would probably be for the best if the long term.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of odd. Yeah, I feel like he comes out around wide receiver 21 in my rankings when I factor in the Hopkins and everything, but it just feels like there's a lower floor here with him because like it's just Cliff, it is wide open offense. I mean, it could just go so many different ways. So I don't have too much Marquise Brown. Maybe I got to bump him down a little bit in my ranks. Chris Godwin's at wide receiver 22. Matt, what do you think of the impact of the torn ACL? The recovery timeline. And then there's also, they lose AB and Gronk. They add Julio and Russell Gage. I mean, it probably frees up targets, if anything. AB was going crazy when he was in the lineup, and Gronk was pretty good too. So where are you on Godwin?
Yeah, I'm way lower than this on Chris Godwin, and I hate it because I love the player. Big Chris Godwin fan, have been for years, but I'm just really not drafting like any of these guys like him or Michael Gallup, thank God, already said like, I'm going to miss week 1. Don't even, that's like not realistic. Obviously Beckham's not on a team either, but I'm typically like going to fade any of these guys that are coming off an injury that's going to stretch into the regular season. And I don't care that he wasn't on the training camp PUP. Like Chris Godwin, I don't think is the way they talk about it is that they're expecting to ramp him up more as the season goes on. I like Chris Godwin a lot as a player, but there's just no way I could click him at wide receiver 22 here.
Sean?
Yeah, like he was way more fun to take when he was wide receiver 30, 35 in that range. But now that looks like he is trending to at least suit up week 1. He might take a few weeks to get to 100%. So I feel like, it's tough taking him here. If you are in a very easy home league, where somebody in your league is a 49ers fan and they draft Elijah Mitchell in the first round and you can guarantee that you're going to make the fantasy playoffs, you should absolutely take Chris Godwin here because, by fantasy playoff time, he should be a high-end wide receiver too. So I think it depends on league type and what you're trying to accomplish. But most leagues, I would want Godwin to drop outside of at least the top 25 right now, just due to the uncertainty in the first few weeks. But again, his value will peak in the most important time of the year, the fantasy playoffs. Whereas Marquise Brown from earlier, his value is going to peak early in the season. And that's when I'm, less in need of that. Like I like guys that will peak in the fantasy playoffs. So that's why I think Chris Godwin has appeal. And if you're going to, make it to the playoffs and get first round bye anyway, then yeah, you should target him.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's he is gonna kind of ramp it up, but I don't like the uncertainty. It's really hard to kind of know how to project him. I mean, is he gonna be ready for week 1 and just not play? I mean, just not play the full complement of snaps? Are they gonna hold him out? Like we don't really have much clarity, so it's really tough at this point. So yeah, he's a guy I've kind of been like, I want to take him. I feel like it would be a nice discount if he was just good to go, but kind of holding off until we know more. So there's really nothing. You just gotta, everyone listening, you just gotta kind of keep up with the news and the rankings and all that. Jerry Jeudy is the wide receiver 23. Matt, what do you think the impact of Russell Wilson is here with Jeudy? Should he be the top Denver wide receiver taking over Cortland Sutton? He's one spot higher than Sutton in the Fantasy Pros half PPR consensus.
Yeah, I've got Sutton a little bit ahead of Jeudy, and I think we can group these two guys together. Like the one thing I struggle with these Denver receivers is that neither one of these guys is coming off a good season in reception perception. And they're certainly not their peak seasons. And I think you could write both off to injury. We were just talking about Chris Godwin with his recovery from an ACL tear. Cortland Sutton fits into this group that we have data on in the first year after an ACL tear. And what I found is since I started doing reception perception in 2014, players coming off and in the first year back from an ACL tear can be expected to lose almost 3% off their success rate versus man coverage numbers from their previous peak. So it's no surprise that, Sutton didn't play up to expectation last year, but he did really struggle. Like he's got to wear a lot of the disappointment from last year. It's funny that obviously we know that the Denver Broncos have had a bad quarterback situation for the most part, but like Teddy Bridgewater is not terrible. And, Cortland Sutton completely disappeared down the stretch when other guys were out there. I think he's got to wear some of that blame. Jerry Jeudy, although did not follow up a very promising rookie year reception perception with a great result. He was kind of more towards that average range and success rate versus man and press coverage last year, but and zone coverage as well. But I mean, you can write some of that off to he was playing with a high ankle sprain, potentially coming back from that. So that's just a struggle with these guys is neither one of them is coming off this like great individual season when like, all right, throw them a good quarterback out there. And Russ is such like a weirdly specific quarterback that he is struggle. Like I struggle to kind of project him a little bit, but I think I feel the best about Cortland Sutton because he has the best peak season on his resume. And Jeudy, I actually think I've got him in this range kind of now, but they had to lose Tim Patrick, I think, to bump him up there because now it's easier to project the targets up, but had Tim Patrick been out there, I think that I probably would have been lower than consensus on Jeudy and higher than consensus on Tim Patrick. But with these two guys now, like I do think the targets can be a little bit more concentrated.
What I like to hear, that Tim Patrick love.
I know, man. What a bummer. I think he's gonna he was gonna crush it as their like big slot receiver this year, but alas.
Yeah, he would have made it real tough to project those three guys though. So maybe it is for the best. But yeah, Sean, where are you on Jeudy and Sutton?
Yeah, this is right about where I have him projected. Just giving Jeudy just a slight lead over Sutton. We've really yet to see Jeudy even come close to his potential yet. I mean, he only has 3 career touchdowns. So I think just being in a better offense that will be higher scoring will help his touchdown upside. I think he'll score, 5 to 7 this year. He'll see plenty of targets. So I think we'll see peak Jeudy finally this year. But as Matt mentioned, I think just Tim Patrick's injury really narrowed this target share to these two. So I think it helps both their floor and ceiling combo. Patrick was going to be a guy I was targeting later on. But both these guys should be, low end wide receiver 2s this season. And Sutton, especially, last year, there were so many weeks where he like led the league in air yards, but didn't convert to fancy points. Unfortunately, air yards that we don't have a scoring system for air yards yet, but This year, he'll convert those to receiving yards with more accurate, passes from Russell Wilson, hopefully. Plus, he had 0 touchdown on his 5 end zone targets last year. So I think there's some positive touchdown regression incoming for Sutton too. So I like both players, but it's just hard to, really squeeze that value when they're already going pretty high to begin with. So I'm ranking them right where they're going right now.
Yeah, I think both of them will bounce back. I think with Sutton, his, like you mentioned, his air yards, his average up to target was 15.8 last year. So that's really high for a guy that's out there, playing, running 90% of the routes, so yeah. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater has never really been a great downfield thrower. So that, that's kind of, I think that contributed. I do think the injury, as you mentioned, Matt, contributed as well. So he's a year removed from that. I think the quarterbacks, I think the quarterback suits Sutton the best. I think Russ is it helps Sutton. So Sutton has that, I don't want to see DK Metcalf upside, but similar, he could be used in a similar way because he has been used in a similar way, even without Russell Wilson already. So there is, I think there is some upside there. I'm cautiously optimistic on him. And I mean, all these wide receivers in this, range are kind of I all got them projected really close. So it's 23, 24, 28, 29. It's kind of all the same at this point. But I have no real issue taking Sutton here. I think I think him and Jeudy both rebound. All right, let's jump to let's talk about the wide receivers in this wide receiver 3 range. Matt, who's your favorite value in the 25 to 36 range?
Yeah, I think for the first time in human history, I'm well ahead of consensus on JuJu Smith-Schuster. I think he's actually a really good fit for what the Chiefs need. Obviously he's kind of fallen off the map the last couple of years with Ben Roethlisberger, and then he got injured last year as well. But I think he's gone from being one of the most overrated receivers in the NFL early in his career to now kind of one of the most underrated receivers. He's still a pretty good big slot receiver, a guy that you want to play off the formation. And I think he can be that type of guy as their flanker slot in Kansas City. Last year he was 11th in terms of success rate versus zone coverage. He actually has the 11th best score all time from his 2019 season in success rate versus zone coverage. So, he's not a traditional press man beater on the outside. He's not a traditional number 1 receiver, but I think he's the most secure non-Kelsey pass catcher on this Chiefs team who can beat zone coverage. And, I've got him projected well ahead of his wide receiver 33, I think, ADP on Fantasy Pros right now. So yeah, I've been really into JuJu this year and really into drafting him, which like I said, is probably the first time in many, many years.
Yeah, JuJu, I mean, just if he gets 85% of the snaps or something, he should beat this ADP. The only thing I'm worried about is they keep saying oh, we want to spread the ball around this year. I don't know if that just means oh, we lost Tyreek Hill. We're just gonna say things that make it sound less bad that we lost Tyreek Hill, or they
that's
really
usually right.
Yeah. Or they just I mean that's the only concern. But
I think the other guys, my thought on that is the other guys kind of cannibalize each other. MVS, Sky Moore. I'm a big Sky Moore fan, but I don't know that he's going to have a real role to start the season. He might be kind of a latter, part of the season player. And as much as everybody hates to admit it, McCole Hardman is still going to probably have a role on this team. So I think those 3 guys all kind of cannibalize each other, MVS, Sky Moore, and McCole Hardman. But JuJu feels the safest to me. I don't know.
Sean, who do you like the most in the wide receiver 25 to 36 range?
I mean, if you had to set odds on this, I should have been minus 5,000 that I would say Gabe Davis here. So yeah, I'm going with Gabe Davis. I was super excited about him this time last year. I think it was late July they signed Emmanuel Sanders, and that just crushed my hopes and dreams of taking Gabe Davis a year early. But I think we're gonna finally see it. Year 3 breakout. Unfortunately, he had to ruin his under the radar status this year by going off for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Chiefs. So his ADP is out of control, but I still think he offers value even in the wide receiver 28 to 30 range. I know people are arguing whether it's a hot take or not. I loved him before that game, so I just have to stay higher than him against consensus. But either way, he's going to be Josh Allen's number 2 target. And he has shined anytime he's seen, starter playing time. Last year, he was severely limited behind Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders. So it wasn't shocking to see him go off in that game when he finally, ran a route over 75% of the time. So Raybon, I'm disappointed you're not wearing that ripped shirt. Anyways, you knew this was going to be the Gabe Davis pod, but I mean, how am I going to pass him up here? So just in this range, I still love Gabe Davis.
Yeah, I love me some Gabe Davis as well, but I'll go with Elijah Moore here because I think, looking at he's down at wide receiver 34. I think, he's primed for a year two leap. A guy who his targets per route run was up around 25%. I know he did really well in reception perception as well. I think he was in like the 70th percentile or better. So he's just a guy that can flat out get open, and he was doing it like down the field. His average at the target was around 13, and he was still commanding like a 25% target per route. I just think this guy could take a big step forward, and that's even if he was doing all this with just like nothing really at the quarterback position. So that's also a really good sign. I think Moore will be the number one wide receiver this year. I think Garrett Wilson will probably slide in as the 2, and Corey Davis will be kind of the forgotten one. But for where he's going at wide receiver 34, I really like Elijah Moore. I think he's right in with all these other guys that are going wide receiver 28, 29, 30. You could get him sometimes a round later. All right. Let's talk about the guys outside the top 36. Give me one guy that you like in that range, Matt.
Yeah, I'm doubling down from last year. I'm going back to Brandin Aiyuk in this range. I mean, you don't have to draft him as high as you did last year, right? So, I mean, the steady drumbeat out of San Francisco matters a lot to me, how much they've been impressed with him, how much like Kyle Shanahan's been publicly, publicly praising him, everything like that, because we know what went so wrong in the first 7 weeks of last year was he was basically just thrown into the doghouse. But, once he got out there, like in the last 8 to 18, he was like a top 20 fantasy receiver. He was basically the guy that you drafted him to be. And I think there's a chance that he can take another step as a player. I mean, I just think he's so talented. He's really good in reception perception, an awesome rookie year, still had a pretty good year last year, even though he was, thrown in the doghouse there for a while. And, it just sounds like they're very, very happy with him as a player, pretty much like from beat reporters to fellow defenders, like Jimmy Ward saying he's the best player in training camp, and, the coaching staff as well. Everybody's kind of on board with Aiyuk. And I definitely had to knock, and it's no shot on Debo, but I had to like knock Debo a couple spots down just because I want to keep knocking Aiyuk up as a guy that I think people should draft, because I just think that his ceiling as a player has yet to be reached. And I think that with the trade over to Trey Lance now as the quarterback, like he's gonna unlock those more downfield portions of the season, even if Trey Lance is probably going to be a little bit of a roller coaster ride this year, which I think is just going to be the case. I think that there's a lot of upside from an efficiency downfield passing perspective with a player like Aiyuk and Trey Lance.
Trey Lance looked pretty good in that preseason game. What was it, Danny Gray with the long pass? That was on point. So yeah, I mean, I actually think Trey Lance will be fine. And Aiyuk was, once he got going, he was out there like 95% of the time. Like he was one of those guys that rarely came off the field. So I would not be surprised to see him take another step. Sean, what about you? Who you like?
I got to go with Drake London, just because he's my favorite rookie wide receiver heading into the season. You guys know we all live in LA. It's very easy to watch USC football during the NFL season. So I do happen to watch my fair share of Trojan games. And just he reminded me sort of like a mixture of Mike Evans and Keenan Allen. Like I thought he was that good. And certainly it showed in his one preseason catch before he got hurt. I mean, it just proved my priors. So I thought he looked solid, and unfortunately he might miss the rest of the preseason. I think that'll help his ADP because I think the more he was going to play and the more film he was going to have out there, I think people would catch on. Plus, he's going to see a massive target share in this offense. I don't even know who the hell to project for the wide receiver 2 right now. Is it Brian Edwards?
Yeah, it should be Edwards.
Either way, this offense will flow through Cordell Patterson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. So it's going to be a pretty narrow target share between those 3. I just love his upside. He's going to have a high floor. So just getting him in this wide receiver 40 to 45 range is the perfect time to take a guy like him. This is when I was getting Mike Williams last year. And if he does happen to start off kind of slow in week 1 due to this new injury, which I'm not expecting, it doesn't matter because you're not drafting him for week 1 anyway. You're drafting him for once bye weeks hit, or if he breaks out. So I just love where he's going, and he's got to be the favorite to score the most fantasy points for all rookie wide receivers. So I love getting him here.
Yeah, I'm with Drake London too. I mean, he's just like his ADP. I think it dropped a couple spots maybe because of the injury, but
Yep.
at wide
Yep.
receiver 45. I mean, I kind of gone back and forth on him. I loved him initially, but then I kind of worried. Is he going to be able to separate? And then I went and looked back and watched him, and I'm with you. I mean, this guy can get open. Like he's not
Yeah.
he's not a stiff at all. Like he's just a big athletic guy that can get open, and I think he's going to be able to do that. Now you never know. The Falcons, could they be maybe a lower volume passing team? Maybe, but I mean, it's going to be him and Kyle Pitts. So anytime you can get a wide receiver one that's like locked into a wide receiver one role at wide receiver 45, I think you got to take it. And I mean, for perspective, like right now, Drake London is going after Russell Gage, Allen Lazard, and Chase Claypool. Like Russell Gage could be the wide receiver 4 on opening day. Allen Lazard is like he could be the wide receiver 3 on opening day. And
I will not stand for any Allen Lazard slander, by the way.
Romeo Dobbs, baby. But I mean, like this guy's locked in to his to his role, and it's only gonna grow. So like you can essentially buy Drake London like at his probably lower than his floor right now. So I can't go to anybody else. There's other guys I like, Robert Woods, I'm cautiously optimistic. We'll see how he's recovering. Lockett, I mentioned, I think he's going too low at 39, but London, I mean, he's got to be in everyone's like your 4th or whatever 5th wide receiver. Like it has to be Drake London at this ADP. All right, there we go. That was a good pod. Matt, really appreciate you taking the time out to join us. Be sure to tell everybody what you're up to and where they can find you.
Yeah, man, appreciate you guys having me on. I feel like this is the meat of like the wide receiver position this year. Like you got to really hack a few guys from here, get those second-year receivers on your team. I love a lot of those players this year. So appreciate you guys having me on. Everybody can find me on Twitter at @MattHarmon_BYB. And more importantly, you can find me every day on the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast, and subscribe to Reception Perception. I guarantee you will like what you find there, receptionperception.com.
Love Reception Perception. I second that. Please do subscribe. And of course, please subscribe to actionnetwork.com as well. You'll get Sean and I's rankings, projections, fantasy tools, all that good stuff. You can find Sean on Twitter at @_oddsmaker. You can find me at Chris Raybon. And you can find us at those same handles on the free award-winning Action Network app. Be sure to check out actionnetwork.com and keep listening to the Fantasy Flex. We got 2 episodes a week coming at you. Until next time, let's get this shmoney.